Hello Internet, and today's video is going to be another book opinion, those videos in which I tell you my opinion on a book, and today's book is going to be A Torture Against the Night by Sahabatir. This is the second book in a quartet, I believe it's going to be. The first book was Ember in the Ashes. You could go watch that review. I basically just complained about everything, and I'm going to do some more complaining because I don't really like this series, okay? It's not my least favorite, it's not the worst book I've read, but there are a lot of things with the storytelling, with the characters, with the plot, that just really frustrate me, and I personally can't forgive. Like, there are gigantic holes here that I am tired of weaving around. Like, they are causing damage to my car. So we're just gonna take a different road, and I'm gonna call the county to get them to fill up these potholes because they're really bad. These potholes are really bad, and the county needs to really take care of them if she wants to be driving on these roads. Like, that was a really complex metaphor. I don't know where I was going with that, but point is, let's get into complaints. So, the plot of this one, just continuing with the plot of the first book, oppressive society, scholars are basically slaves all the time. The royals are now after Elias because Elias became a traitor. Helen has become the second in command to the king. The king is that evil little douche boy who was super rapey. Okay, super rapey. And Laya is still an idiot. So, you know, nothing's really changed here. So first, I want to complain about the magical subplot, which again is something that's mentioned more in this book. But again, I just feel like it's kind of shoved in there. Like, there are a lot of times, especially like with books like this, where books that I think are good and have a lot of potential, I don't hate the other plots that I don't think don't connect. I do see how their connections work. I do see what the author is going for, but they just seem so out of place that it's very awkward fit. So the magical subplot in here follows around genies and jinn, and we learn a lot about like what the scholars did to the jinn and why the scholars are now in the situation they are in because the jinn hate them and basically kind of made this situation so that the scholars could be subjugated because the scholars weren't too nice to the jinn. So basically it's the scholars' own fault that they are slaves. Which, I guess, like, I'm not mad about that. Like, okay, whatever. What I am irritated by was, like, how just shoved in there it was. Like, Elias just walks through the woods and then this is dumped on us. Like, it doesn't really feel intertwined with the story, especially when we get to like Laya's part with her dealing with the jinn. She doesn't really think about the fact she has this magical disappearing act power. She doesn't even contemplate that this is a power until like the last fourth of the book, even though she's been doing it since the very first book. So like, there's a lot of magic stuff in it that is just thrown in there, and then all of a sudden it's info dumped on us what is happening and why it's happening the way it is, and you're just like, oh, okay. So the way you learn about why the genie they are the way they are and like what's happening, there are just two large info dumps that happen. Just two giganto info dumps. Instead of working it throughout your story, having your characters learn and grow and question and wonder and then talk to the right people or like infer and like do research or anything out throughout the whole story, it's just like the characters stumble along, oops, tripped on the magic plot, okay, we're gonna dump some stuff here. Like, I swear, you could have done it through Laya. Laya has had like magic. Helen has had magic. Freaking Helen has magic. And none of these characters really take into consideration what these things mean. They just ignore it until it's obvious they can't ignore it anymore, and then all of a sudden they acknowledge this thing, and that's just really weak for me. I think if you wanted to have the genie be a thing, have this magical plot, have your characters interact with the plot. Like, have them interact with the plot. They are not interacting with the plot just happens to them for the sake of you as the reader figuring out what's going on. that's just not how I want to read. I want my characters to actually interact with the world that they're in. However, when it comes to the magical subplot, it feels like it's something happening to them, but not happening while they're actually conscious of something, and that's just really uncomfortable for me. Next, we have characters. So here I'm just going to complain about Helen. I talked about in the first video about the first book how Helen is just a really frustrating character for me because she only ever does stuff for the sake of Elias, but never has this moment in which she contemplates her own worldview, in which she thinks, hey, maybe what I've been taught by these royals, what I've been taught by my society is wrong, and I should do better. She just does whatever is best befitting for the sake of her getting into Elias's pants. And there's just a lot of points. Like, there's this one point where she has to attack tribals people, right? And to get information on Elias. And she's like, I don't want to torture because torture is wrong. Like, let's just ask her. Maybe she'll give us some information if we're presentable. Like, let's not just, no. She's like, let's not torture children, right? I don't want to torture children. That's just messed up. We could torturing adults, okay, fine, they're fair game. But let's not get children. And then the next second, because she might not get Elias properly, or like something might happen here or there, she's like, let's just torture everybody. I'm like, so at the end of the day, you're not really struggling with your worldview. You're doing it for the sake of somebody else. Like, whatever good or bad she does is always for the sake of somebody else and never like her own autonomy. Like, she never acts on her own, if you get what I'm saying here. Like, she never has a personal struggle with her worldview. There are a few points where she's like, man, maybe I shouldn't torture random people. But the next second, she's like, man, I should have tortured them more. I'm like, so are you struggling with your worldview or not? Like, because you seem like the same bitch you were at the beginning. Are you going to actually grow as a person? No, she's not. She's just a really frustrating character. I don't like her. I also don't like her compared to the Commandant, because the Commandant is just one evil person, right? Like, the Commandant's just not a good person. And when you place the Commandant next to Helen, because Helen has to talk to the Commandant a lot, I felt like it was like a baby talking to a giant. The Commandant was just super powerful. And I'm like, so how am I supposed to take you defeating the genie and the Commandant when it doesn't even seem like you're competent enough to have a conversation with this woman? Like, she seems like 2,000 steps ahead of you. So I never once felt like I could believe that Helen could save the day. One, because she never had a good struggle of worldview. Like, she had angst, but she never had that good worldview struggle where she's actually fighting against in herself the societal things that she has been taught. She goes along with them. She never really questions them unless they get in the way of her purposes, and only ever to an extent in that case. And then, like, her against the Commandant, it's just like, you're a freaking baby. And it doesn't feel like she's a smart baby. She's like a baby that was laid on its back and its head got a little flattened. Like, because you're supposed to lay babies on their stomach anyway. Like, she's not the smartest. And it's frustrating, and just watching her against, like, the villains, she gets played so often. Like, she is not an equal foe to her foe. That's basically it. Like, no. She's just not. She's not that great. For the other characters, it was much of the same. Elias being super angsty to the point where I was just like, I can't anymore. He is my favorite character out of this whole series, but given that there's not a lot of great characters in my opinion, it wasn't really that hard. However, I do not like the fact that he blames himself for all the world's problems. You are not at fault for everything that happens in the world. Like, it is not your fault. So that was really frustrating. Lio was still the same naive person up until the end. I was just like, how can you have not figured this out yet? You want to know why? It's because things happen to these characters, but these characters never contemplate what is happening. They don't interact with the plot. That is why she is so naive. Like, stuff happens to her all the time, but she has blinders on. Like, she literally never sees anything coming, ever. And that is frustrating. How can anyone be that naive? I don't know. There's another thing that really frustrated me. There was a lot of points where, like I said in the first book, these characters overheard a lot of information. And there was a lot of points in this where I was just like, why don't these people share information with each other? Like, this is the point in time where it's kind of established you are a group. I can understand, like, not trusting everyone in your group, but there was a lot of points where I was like, maybe you should recall what you eavesdropped, and if you could compare notes, you guys could figure out. But like I said, I'm pretty sure all of their eavesdropping, all of that sort of stuff, was just for the sake of the audience. Therefore, what information do they have to share? Because obviously they don't have any, even though they eavesdropped, because all it was for the sake of the audience, not actually for them to interact with the plot. Like, they never interact with the plot with the information they should know. They don't. It's so frustrating. And the last big thing I'm going to complain about is the villains. There's the Commandant and there's the Genie. The Genie got a little bit more backstory towards the end in one of the info dump portions. So he feels like a little more well-rounded with his villainousness. But the Commandant still is a big question mark, and both of them just feel like mustache twirlers. The Commandant especially, because again, whenever you see her, it's her against Helen, and Helen is not the smartest person. So there's never really any push or pull. There's just the Commandant pulling everybody along and puppeteering everything because she's obviously the only smart person here. So that's just super frustrating because, like, she's just a one-sided, a big bad boss where I'm pretty sure all of the players are on level 1. So I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how they're supposed to defeat her because they're all idiots. And she's just like this awesome mustache twirler who's evil for like no apparent reason. Like, she has daddy issues. And that's about it. Like, is she evil because she has daddy issues? Is that why? Maybe. I don't know. And I think at the end of the day, the villains, when it comes to villains, the Genie is the stronger villain. And I say this simply because he got more of a backstory, more of a development for what his character is, what his purpose is doing, and all of that sort of stuff. However, like I mentioned before, the magical plot is just not strong enough to support him as a villain, because whenever magic is involved with this story, it just happens to the characters, but they're never interacting with it. So how are you supposed to interact with a villain who is a part of a plot that your characters don't even actively interact with, unless it comes to the parts where you're just dumping information on your reader? Like, there's just, I feel like this is a mess. But this book was a mess. So what do you expect my video to be? I don't know if I was really talking properly, if I was really conclusive with my things, but here's the short notes. Here's the spark notes of how I think about this book. It's decent. You can have a good time with it. You could probably get yourself invested, enjoy yourself. If you're not super analytical of everything that's going on, if you're not like analyzing every little thing, then you're probably gonna have a good time. But my problems is that I overanalyze the shit out of things, and here are the issues. There are plots that happen in this book that happen to the characters, but they never interact with. The characters are not very well developed and still remain the same characters as they were from page 1, book 1. They just don't develop in a pace they don't learn. 3. Characters do not interact with the information that they are given. Once again, this just makes it feel like the plot is happening to the characters, but the characters are not actually interacting with the plot itself and moving the plot forward. Instead, we just get info dumps so that you as a reader can continue with the stories, and you're kind of leaving the characters behind, which the characters should be guiding you. You shouldn't be waiting for the characters to catch up. So that's an issue. The villains are pretty weak because they just come across as evil mustache twirlers. They don't really have any motivations given, any real identity, any real characteristics, anything that you can really grip onto other than, oh, here comes this evil thing again. And the one villain who has that potential is a part of the plot that has the weakest parts. So the strongest villain is a part of the weakest plot. And most mustachy twirling villain that has like nothing going for her really is a part of the stronger plot, and she weakens that. So there's good and bads, and they kind of taint each other, and in the end it's just not as good as it could have been. And I'm not saying that I think this book shouldn't be YA to be better. I just think you need to stop taking shortcuts when telling your story, and I'll appreciate your story more. Like, there are just so many parts in this where I'm like, you are taking a shortcut instead of diving deep into this character, into this plot, into this world, that it is getting tiring for me, because I shouldn't be trying to fill in and fix your shorthand. You should be giving me information, not me trying to figure out information and like turning the book 3 ways to Sunday to try to see if I read everything properly. Because like, it's your story. I shouldn't have to make up stuff to fill in the blanks. I shouldn't. Like, I'm not the author of the story. So to understand your story, I shouldn't have to fill in the blanks, because I can only go off what you give me. And what you give me is a bunch of shorthand crap that really makes everything seem really shallow. Like, I can't infer deeper meaning when there is no fucking deeper meaning. Anyway, that's what I gotta say on Torch Against the Night. Wasn't that good. Won't be continuing. It'll be going on my I don't like this bookshelf, because I want a shelf of books I don't like, because that's the type of person I am. If you like what you're seeing here and you want us to continue to see more, click all those buttons below. If you love this book, go love this book. I'm just going to be salty over here about it because I didn't. So be offended, don't be offended. It's all in like good graces of what I like and don't like. So, goodbye, internet.